morning, everyone. I am Belinda Cheeseborough, STEM Education Specialist at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm here to share the stories of African Americans and the impacts they've had and continue to have on our American culture because of their STEM contributions. Through the Window and Into the Mirror is a video conversation series about the experiences of African American STEM professionals today. This time around, we come with a special episode as we celebrate Black History Month. During this session, students will peer into the windows of their speakers' lives and learn from their lived experiences. They will also find parts of their culture and lifestyle mirrored in their stories. To everyone listening, it is our hope that you leave here with information, inspiration, and plans for action as you take your first steps towards having careers in STEM. Now, let's meet our speaker. Joel Bervell is a Ghanaian American medical student and science communicator. On social media, he is better known as the medical mythbuster for creating viral medical content that is at the forefront of conversations about racial disparities in healthcare, the hidden history of medicine, and overlooked biases in the healthcare industry. Joel has been featured on Good Morning America, Business Insider, NPR, Yahoo News, WebMD, and has advised organizations like TikTok on efforts to increase diversity and inclusion. He was named by TikTok as the top 2021 Voice for Change, featured by TikTok as one of 10 changemakers on their inaugural Discover list, named as one of 10 recipients of the 50K Macro TikTok Black Creatives Grant, a part of Meta's 2022 We the Culture class, and was a nominee for the Ad Color Awards. The Smithsonian Channel chose him as a 2022 cycle breaker, and Scientific American named him a 2022 revolutionary. Welcome, Joel. I'm so excited to speak with you today while engaging the teachers, students, and family of students watching this interview.
Thank you so much for
Now,
having me.
yeah, I'm glad to have you here. So, first off, let's just start with you telling us about what you currently do and anything else that's important for us to know.
Sure. So right now I'm a fourth year medical student. I go to Washington State University. It's in Seattle, Washington area, but I'm actually doing what's called a research year. So I'm living in Baltimore for the past year, and I'm doing a research year in orthopedic surgery. So for those who don't know, orthopedics is essentially the bones, ligaments, joints, and sometimes you can get a broken bone, or your hip might not work anymore. You might not be able to raise your hand, and so I'm helping doctors kind of heal people in that sense right now. But better online, I'm known as the medical mythbuster, as was explained. And so I create content through social media where I talk about biases in medicine and disparities that exist. I think a lot of people think of medicine as this field that is objective. And while it is, a lot of the things that we know today were built off of prior beliefs that in many cases were biased or were built on stereotypes. So I go through and try and parse out what is true, what is false, and really understand what new literature and research says about racial disparities in medicine.
It's awesome. So let's go down to your childhood. Let's talk about your childhood for a little bit. So, did you have interest in STEM while growing up?
I did. The joke I always make is my parents from Ghana, West Africa, and so when they came over to the United States, they kind of told my siblings that we could be one of three things: either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. I knew I didn't want to be an engineer because my dad's an engineer. Wasn't really sure about law, and I actually have always been interested in public speaking, and so thought about law for a long time. But medicine really took my heart, and just understanding sciences and STEM, just growing up. I loved math as a kid in elementary school. I was the one that was always doing these, like always at the front of the class, always tutoring my friends. In middle school, loved biology. Even now, actually, I was just texting my biology teacher from sixth grade yesterday, and so they had such a huge impact on me growing up. And in high school, I made sure to take all the STEM classes I could, especially the AP classes that were in it. So always was interested in STEM, and kind of over time, just dove deeper and deeper into it.
Awesome. You just did all the things that a STEM kid usually does.
Yeah.
So, it seems like you've had a lot of positive STEM experiences while growing up. Did some of those inspire you to what you're doing right now, like going into the field of medicine? And
Absolutely.
specifically, like moments made you feel like, okay, I want to pursue medicine as a career?
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many moments for me. I think even just in middle school, I think back to the things that I was learning in my science classes, and we would do things like dissect cow eyeballs. And I thought that was so fascinating. Or we would learn about our digestion and just how when you eat, what happens. Why is it that the food that goes in your mouth comes out as poop in the end, you know? And like really trying to understand how our bodies work, how the world works around us. I think one of my biggest STEM experiences, especially in the field of medicine, was my first year in high school. I was at Seattle Children's Hospital, and I was matched up through a program called Teens in Public Service. And they essentially give high school students a summer internship somewhere in the Seattle area. And I was thankfully matched with at a medical place because I'd asked for something that was related to STEM. And at Seattle Children's Hospital, I was what's called a child life specialist. And so all that meant was I would go in and meet with the kids that were kind of on the wards in the hospital and talk with them and keep them company. We'd play video games or we'd play board games. And specifically, every week I'd go to the dialysis ward. Dialysis is where if someone's kidneys aren't working, you actually need to get the toxins filtered out of your blood. And there's one kid that I would see every single week in the dialysis ward. We'd play shoots and ladders, we'd play chess. And as we were playing, like the doctors would come in and kind of talk to him about his diagnosis, talk to his parents. And it really inspired me to go into medicine and better understand what a doctor does and how they actually help people. And so while there's a lot, I think that was one of my first experiences at Seattle Children's Hospital where I fell in love with the field of medicine and realizing that science can be used in a way to help people and that there's so many opportunities to do it in different ways.
It's really cool. That's a very interesting experience that you had while growing up. So also, as you were growing up, did you have any role models or big influences?
Definitely. Um, I think, yeah, I had a lot of different influences just as I was growing up. I'm not gonna lie, my first biggest influence wasn't even a real person. It was a cartoon character. When I was a kid, even today, I still love superheroes. And I used to watch this TV show about a cartoon character called Static Shock. And it was really cool because he actually mirrored my life in a lot of ways. He liked science. He was Ghanaian American and was living in the United States. There was even an episode done where he actually went to Accra, which is near where my parents are from, and kind of explored his heritage, which was so surreal for me. But like he just inspired me because he was like this kid, the same age as me at that time, like as a young kid. But he was a superhero, you know, like having this like extra life where he was going out and saving people. In my mind, I kind of compare that to, in a way, being a doctor. You know, like while he was being a superhero, like I thought of doctors as superheroes, as these people that went out and saved individuals' lives. And so that he actually was a huge inspiration for me growing up. But as I kind of got older and I had like reality sets in, I started getting real life role models too. And so when I was in middle school, one of my biggest role models was Barack Obama. And I think when he became president, that was a huge moment for me to realize that I could step into leadership positions as well. And so the year he was inaugurated as president, I remember I was a seventh grader at that time. And so I ended up running for student body president because I was like, oh, if Obama can do it, I can do it too. I ended up winning as student body president. So in eighth grade, I was student body president, and my friends used to call me Obama. And so I think I kind of got it in my head, like, oh, cool, like I could do leadership, I could do this. And when I went to high school, I continued doing leadership. And so ninth, 10th, and 11th grade, I was my class president. And then when I was a 12th grader, I was the whole school president, so student body president. But I think a lot of that came from getting confidence from seeing someone who looked like me get to the highest position in the United States, become president. And even now, like I still will go back and like watch his speeches because I think there's something that was so unique and inspiring about the campaign that he ran. The way that social media was used, actually, Obama was one of the first presidents to use social media in a way that hadn't been done before. And so even the way that he connected with communities on the ground was so inspiring. And so I think there's a lot of parallels even between my story and that story of like the things he was doing to inspire communities that even now I still get so much motivation from.
Wow, I did not know that he was one of the first presidents to do that, to really utilize social media in that way. That's really cool. And
Yeah,
also, like, you've just touched on a very important point about how important representation is and how it can be used to inspire people. That's why we do what we do. That's the whole purpose of this program. And so I'm glad that you touched on the heart of that from your
absolutely.
experience. That's beautiful. So, what are some other hobbies and interests you had while growing up aside from the STEM related ones?
Yeah, I was kind of the kid that did it all. I love to keep busy, and my parents love to keep me busy too. Not in a bad way, but in like, I think coming from Ghana, they came here trying to figure out what could we do to make our kids the most successful that they can be. So I started playing piano, for example, when I was in fifth grade. Or actually not fifth grade. I was 5 years old when I started playing piano, and I played piano all the way through high school, and even beyond. And I took lessons and played competitively. Would go to competitions for it. I played clarinet and saxophone too, and so I was in band, loved music, and I was in choir, but wasn't the best singer. I actually, in eighth grade, I was in my church choir, and I ended up passing out because my breathing when I sang was so bad that I literally just fell on the floor, and everyone was like, "What just happened?" But that kind of
Oh my
stopped.
God.
Yeah, that kind of stopped the choir part for me, but I still love to do karaoke even today. I love to play soccer too. And so I was on a lot of different sports teams growing up. I played baseball, hated that. I got hit in the face, my lips swelled up. After that, it was over for me. I played basketball for a little bit, but I never grew, so I kind of grew out of that one. And then soccer was the one that I played all throughout high school. Yeah, so I did a lot of different things. I think just trying to kind of do everything. I was really interested in just understanding what do people do for fun and what is out there. And so really fell in love with kind of the music and sports aspect of everything.
That's really cool. I identify with a lot of what you were saying, especially the music part. I also did piano when I was 5 years old, but I didn't do it for as long as you and definitely wasn't very good.
I won't even lie. I think there's a lot of times I wanted to quit. My mom was like, "No, keep doing it." Like my grandpa used to play piano, and I think for her it was this moment where she could relive her own dad in us. And as I grew up, I actually appreciated it a lot more because one of the things I do now, like just for when I need to relax, I'll go and find a piano and play it. And I think it's really cool to one have songs that you've memorized that you can play, but two even be able to just pick up a sheet music and sight read, and so that's something that I love to do. And I guess what other hobbies I got, like when I got more towards middle school and high school, I started doing a lot of school clubs as well. And so I mentioned doing student government. That was a huge interest of mine, was just understanding leadership. And in high school, we learned about this model of leadership called servant leadership. And it was this idea that as a leader, a lot of people think of the CEO, like a person at the top of a company, as the leader. Servant leadership tries to flip that model upside down and make it an upside down triangle, where the leader is actually at the bottom, and the people that are working are the ones that you should really be inspiring and trying to make them leaders as well. And I think that model was something that I really took under my wing, and even today I try and use, is understanding how to servant leadership is all about inspiring other people. And if you look at the leaders in history who have been like that, it's people like Mahatma Gandhi, Jesus, even how they were people that really self-sacrificed. And there's this difference when you think about leadership between power and influence. Influence is inspiring people and getting them to kind of follow along with a vision. Influence is the thing that keeps going. So interests like that were things that kind of I picked up, and yeah, and I actually started a nonprofit with my siblings too when I was in middle school that we still run to this day. It's called Hugs for Ghana, and it was created in memory of my grandma who used to take stuffed animals from my siblings and I's room, and she would take them back to Ghana, West Africa, and donate them to hospitals there. And when my grandma passed away in middle school, my sister was like, it'd be awesome to honor grandma's memory by doing something with what that she used to do. And so we ended up starting schools, stuffed animal drives at my school, and raising stuffed animals to then take to Ghana and hand deliver to kids there. And when my sister graduated from high school, I took over and I focused on kind of sports equipment, so soccer equipment, school supplies, and medical equipment as well, because those were kind of my passions. And that's something that, like I said, we run to this day. I was actually just texting some students. We take students over all the time. So in 2019, we took a group of 15 students from my high school, and we're planning another trip to go this year, hopefully in June. So I had a lot of different interests. It was kind of crazy to think I was running a nonprofit when I was in high school and middle school, but all these things were things I just found passions in and loved doing.
That is so beautiful and so amazing to be starting, as you said, like starting a nonprofit in high school slash middle school. Like that's crazy. And I'm glad that you're still able to run it and that you're still able to bring more people in to be a part of it. Cause that's such a beautiful thing to reaching out to community across the ocean. That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
So moving into your undergrad years, where did you go for undergrad?
So I ended up going to Yale University for undergrad. That's in New Haven, Connecticut. And for people that know geography, that's far. So I was basically the farthest you could get from Seattle, Washington, from home.
And I'm assuming you majored in biology. And so what made you decide to pursue that major, as you mentioned before, but let's just reiterate it again.
Yeah, I applied into college knowing I wanted to go into medicine. And so even when I looked back at my college applications, the major I put down was molecular cellular developmental biology. Lots of L's, so it's hard to say, but we abbreviated it to MCDB. And that was the major that I went into college and graduated with. And I think it was partly because I loved medicine. But the cool thing about MCDB was it was more about the molecular level of it, the things we don't see, how our cells work, and one of the new epigenetic modulators or bromodomain inhibitors, like random words that I didn't know before, but now know how do those impact how we create medications that can be used for in the future. And so I loved learning about molecular biology. I think honestly, if I could go back, I would probably major in something different, just because now that I'm so into medicine, I'm like I could have explored and done economics or psychology, but I still was able to take classes like that. And that's the beautiful thing about going to a school that does a liberal education. I took a lot of different types of classes.
It's really cool. And I guess that's something that we don't usually think about is like how broad medicine actually is. And it's not just like, oh, you're going to the doctor's office for a checkup. There's like so many different layers to it and so many different people involved in each of those layers and levels. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you think about like a doctor in an office, like one, you're working with a whole team, right? And so understanding how do you even do teamwork is really important. That's where the psychology piece of it comes in. But even that understanding as a doctor, you're in a way running a business at the same time. And so do you understand the economics of it as well? Do you understand how much patients have to pay and how they're paying? Do you know how insurance works? Do you know how political policies are impacting what is and isn't allowed to happen inside the hospital? So all these different types, like you're mentioning, all these different just different disciplines come together in medicine, and that's actually one of the reasons why I love it. Is you can stack medicine on top of anything. Medicine and tech, medicine and business, medicine and policy. And I think the more niche you go, the more you realize that there's so many opportunities because not enough people are doing that and looking at it in a unique way.
exactly. So while you were going through undergrad, you already knew that you wanted to pursue a career in medicine. What opportunities helped you towards your career goals?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good question. I think the Seattle Children's Hospital opportunity was one of the first I mentioned. So getting the shadowing experience. But then I did a lot of things that were adjacent that I didn't think connected, but now I realize they do. So I'll kind of walk through some of the things I did over my summers. My first summer in college, I worked at Google actually. And so I was in the kind of the business and leadership development arm of it. Very different. And it was really interesting because I got to understand how a tech company works, you know? Now looking back, I'm like, oh wow, I guess I do a lot of work with tech companies, right? I've worked with Google and Meta and TikTok, and so like I understand that. But having worked there, I learned about how social media can be this driver for just education, you know, and getting information out there. But also then how do ad revenue things work, and what are tech companies trying to do? I actually at halfway through college, I thought I was going to not do medicine and instead do tech. And I think I remember I had a conversation with my parents where my parents were like, no, like you can do tech at any time. Stick with medicine. You got this. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I stuck with it. And now I'm happy about it. But I almost switched out to something different. My sophomore year of college, I worked at a place called the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C. And actually, I had gotten this opportunity through a nonprofit called the Institute for Responsible Citizenship. It's based in Washington, D.C. And essentially, what they do is they give Black males internships in Washington, D.C. For 2 summers. So this was my first summer. I was placed at the Urban Institute, which is a think tank, and I was doing health policy. It was at the time when Obama was actually still in office in the DC. And so I was researching about the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, and how specifically Medicaid can impact kind of patients getting access to services like the emergency department. And whether some states were doing what's called expanding Medicaid so that more people could have access to it. For those who don't know, Medicaid is essentially a supplement, like an insurance that people can apply for if they don't make a certain amount of income. And so it allows you to get services and get access to health insurance and healthcare. But that was really interesting because my first time understanding policy, I learned what Medicaid was, how it differed from Medicare. I learned what CHIP was, so like child services too. I went around in DC to different places, and the institute was amazing because they also connected us to a lot of leaders, African American leaders in DC. So every year we would meet with the late Congressman John Lewis. And so I got to meet him 3 times. We met with the late General Colin Powell, also got to meet him 3 times. And we'd go around and literally it was only 12 of us. And we would have these conversations, intimate conversations, where we could ask these huge leaders who even now are huge historical figures about their time growing up. And those things were so pivotal for me because I think I still hearken on that even in medicine, because I listened to like what their leadership was in those times, in those times of crisis. I think my junior year summer after that, I was at Howard University Hospital, and that's where I was placed actually in the orthopedic surgery department. So that was my first ever real opportunity being in the operating room, understanding what it looked like, and I fell in love with it. And it was also the first time that I actually met Black doctors and actually got to know them really well. Dr. Terry Thompson was the doctor that I was matched with, and he's renowned at Howard University in the orthopedic department. But I remember I got there on the first day. It was super, I think I got there like 7 a.m. or something, which at that time I was like, this is so early. Like, I'm tired. I want to sleep in. It's the summer. And they'd already started the surgery when I walked in. And I almost passed out because there was a person on the table. Their arm was totally open. Like, I wasn't used to it. Didn't know what to do in the OR. It was my first time in. I was there with one other student, and we both had to step out for like a few minutes, and then we came back in. But I fell in love that summer with surgery, with orthopedic surgery specifically. And now I'm at Johns Hopkins doing a year of orthopedic surgery. And so I think it really is full circle in just kind of how it happened of starting at an HBCU, historically Black college and university, getting that experience to work with those doctors, and now kind of being on a path where I'm in medical school, hopefully going to be entering into a field just like that.
That is so awesome. You had some really great experiences, and it's also interesting to see how they all connected in some way to where you're at right now. And also to meet the great leaders that you met um, before they passed.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
yeah.
That's a memorable experience that will just continue to leave an impression on you forever.
And I'll
That's really
never
cool.
I have notes from those meetings still, and like I all the time go back to them and just read through them because I mean, they truly changed the world, you know, and it's just incredible to know that their legacy will live on in that way, and that I had a chance to hear from them multiple times about like the intricacies of it, you know, the things that you don't often get to ask. And my favorite question was always to ask, when you were my age right now, did you ever expect to be this great leader? And their answer was always no. You know, you're just kind of taking it one day at a time, living your best life and making sure that you're doing things that will better other people. And in the end, it always comes around.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like you do these things and you're not like in the back of your mind, you're probably thinking like, I want to change the world, but you don't know how, and you don't realize that everything that you're doing can impact changes on the world at
Absolutely.
some other point. So that's really cool. So now getting to where you're currently at, you're in med school and you're saying you're almost done. So what was the med school application process like? So for someone, I went through the typical grad school application to go into physics. So like I'm not
Mhm.
familiar with like what the med school process is like. So if
Yeah.
you could fill us in on those details.
Yeah, most people aren't familiar with the med school application process, but it's pretty strenuous. So the application lasts essentially for a year. You start applying a year before you actually get admitted into your school. And so, let's say let's say this year, if people wanted to start applying, they would start applying in June, and then you send in your applications. You get what's called secondaries after you send in your primary application. Secondary applications come back, you fill those out, send them in, and then schools will start contacting you for interviews. In between about September to um, March-ish, you'll have interviews where you actually have to fly to the medical school that you're applying to and interview there. And in those interviews, they're day-long events. So you get there at 8 a.m., they end at 5 p.m. Maybe in the morning, the dean will tell you a little bit about their school. Then you have maybe 3 interviews with different people. And then you have what's called MMIs. I'm getting flashbacks right now because I haven't talked about this in so long. It's been a while since I've been through this. But then you go through what's called MMIs, multiple mini interviews. And basically, there's 8 different stations that are set up, and they're only 10-minute interviews or less. Sometimes even they're way less. And some of them are stations that just ask, "Tell me about yourself." Others are kind of scenario type things, and so they'll say, "You have a patient that comes in and they are late because they had to go pick up their child, but they're late by an hour and their appointment's gone. You're the last physician there. Do you take that patient or not? Walk me through how you would explain this to them. Like scenarios like that. And so you'll have to sit with this person that you don't know, random person. You'll be like, well, here's what I would say to this patient, and I'd be thinking about this, etc. And so then after that, you kind of wait until you hear back from those medical schools about where you get in after your interview day. But I kind of even skipped over all the previous things too, which is to even be able to apply into medical school, you have to have certain requirements. You have to take biology, physics, organic chemistry. You have to take the MCAT, which is an exam that kind of goes through all of those things, chemistry and biochemistry, and physics and critical reading, because that's a huge part of medicine too, is being able to read research articles. There's a lot that goes into it. And then overall, you find out usually around March or April. Actually, it's a rolling admission, so you find out throughout the year where you're going to get in. But most people know by March or April where they're going to be going, and then you'll start in August following after that. So it's a long process, as you can see.
That is a long and strenuous process. It is also like reminding me a little bit about the process of grad school, but definitely not to that level. There's a lot involved. That's
Mhm.
wow. So now that you went through all of that and you were having these med programs reaching back to you and saying, "Oh, you got in here," and all of that. So what made you decide to go to Washington State University?
Yeah. So in before I actually went to medical school, I did a grad school program. I got a master's in medical science. And for my second year of my grad school program, I ended up doing clinical research at Providence Hospital, which is in Seattle, Washington. My grad school was in Boston. So I lived in Boston for a year, and then came back home to Washington and worked as a clinical researcher for a year. And while I was there, I heard about this new school called Washington State University that was really focused on making sure that they're providing equitable care to rural and urban communities. And that was something that I'd always been interested in, is how do you make sure that care is given to people that really need it. When I was in college, I'd taken a lot of classes at the School of Management that are about healthcare economics. And I learned about how much people had to pay for healthcare, how expensive it was. That in the United States, we pay the most of any other developed country for healthcare, but get the least in returns. That patients spend almost, I think it's like 80% of expenditures in healthcare are in the last year of life. It's just life preserving care. So I heard all these things, and so I was really interested when I was applying to medical school about how do you understand disparities in medicine, creating equitable systems. So when I heard Washington State was doing that, I was like, I definitely have to apply. Before I even applied, I met with one of the deans of the campuses, Dr. Schechter, sat down with him, talked to him about the school, talked to him about like what my goals were, and he was like, "This is the perfect place for you if you want to come here." They also have a huge emphasis on leadership, and I think I talked a little about servant leadership before, but they have a huge emphasis on leadership as well. And so, talking about how can doctors be leaders in the community beyond just the medical space, but in other areas as well. Those were things that I was really interested in understanding. And then, of course, it's in state. And so, in state tuition is way less than if you're out of state. So, I got into some other schools, and the difference between Washington State University to other schools per year was probably a 3 times higher cost if I went out of state, yet it's the same degree. And so I think that had a huge impact on me too, to be like, okay, I think a lot about finances, I think a lot about economics. I want to make sure that one, I'm setting myself up to be successful as a doctor, but two, I don't want to go into debt. And a lot of people don't know this, but medical school is expensive. Each year of medical school, I think the average is about $50,000. So that means for 4 years, you're expecting about $200,000 in debt if you can't pay that yourself. And you're having to take out loans for that. And then those loans add up every single year after medical school. And so I was really conscious of wanting to make sure that I went somewhere that I would have the most success, that I could understand and talk about disparities and learn about it, but where I'd also financially be able to succeed.
Is something very important to consider. And I'm glad that you touched on that because, again, that's a problem, but we don't have, that's a whole can of worms we don't have to go
Yeah.
into today. But it is something to consider when you're pursuing any career in STEM is like the cost of going through stuff and just taking opportunities to minimize that cost as much as possible. So
Mhm.
thank you for mentioning that. So now that you have gone to your med program, what do you like about your med program?
Yeah, I love, like I said, I love that my school focused on health equity. And I really found that when I went to my school. I think I'll talk about this later about why I kind of started to create my videos, and it links into things I didn't see in my school. But the things that they did have were awesome. And so there was actually a class that we could take as an elective that was about medical activism. And actually like how do you even like structure and think about activism as a community leader? And so we learned about different models for activism. We learned about how do you engage the community leaders? How do you find the stakeholders? How do you have necessary interviews with people? And it was absolutely amazing. So it's a class that I think inspired a lot of the things I do now, because I could better understand the frameworks I wanted to kind of create and how to reach communities where they were needed. And so that class was awesome. We met like once a week. It was just medical students that were interested in learning more about activism and health equity, and that was great. I also loved that I think my school's really amenable and open to a lot of things. And so when I mentioned this before, but I love student government. So I ran it once again for student government, and I was student body president at my school. I also started a student national medical association, which is an organization that's dedicated to diversifying the field of medicine. I think my school is really open to creating these types of things and hearing our voices to have these new programs. It was a newer school. I was only in the third class of students. And so because of that, I think they were open to hearing different ideas about wanting to kind of create and craft a culture. What was interesting though was COVID hit when I was still in medical school. And so I was a first year medical student actually still when COVID hit. And so I only got about half of my first year medical school in person. Everything else went virtual. And so that my school once again was like very technologically savvy, and so that was actually a smooth transition where we moved everything online. They gave us iPads on our first day of class, actually. So we used iPads for our quizzes. We used it for like our Zooms, everything. So things thankfully worked out pretty well. But I think all those things were things that drew me to it. They're very innovative in the ways that they were looking at future healthcare leaders.
That is so awesome. And I'm really proud of your program for reaching out to the students to learn more about how they can better serve you and also how to make the program a more enriching experience. And also that you have like classes like that and opportunities to take like like medical advocacy. Like that is really cool.
Yeah, and rare.
Sorry, medical activism.
It's rare in medicine too, where to even have those types of classes. And we actually the class was also with undergrad students, and so it was an
Ooh,
opportunity. It was like Gonzaga University, which is in Spokane, Washington, which is where I did my first 2 years. There's undergrads there, and then we were also in kind of with like med students and just other professional students too.
that's really cool. So you told us how much you love your program and all the really cool things you get to do that you got to do while being in this medical program. But what are the most challenging aspects of your?
I think the most challenging part of just medical school in general, and this includes my program, is there's not as much guidance as you get when you're in high school or even college. Medical school is really, you're all self-driven. You have to study on your own. Like they give you classes and stuff, but you don't necessarily have to go, right? And then it's also the interesting thing about medical school is it's not just reading out of books. You're combining this book knowledge, the what you're reading, with actually going out into the field and practicing. So in the first 2 years of medical school, it's basically it's the clinical years where you're learning the material. Your second 2 years, you're practicing the material. And so we're actually in the hospitals as a third year medical student, working with patients. We're helping in the operating room. We're doing things. Even in your first 2 years, you're getting early clinical exposure. So as a first year, we'd gone to hospitals and we would interview patients that had diabetes, that had congestive heart failure, to understand what their lives looked like or what kind of treatments they were getting. We had to learn a lot of material to understand how do you parse a lot of information that you get from people and understand their primary core needs so you can actually help them in what they need. And so I think that was the difficult part of medical school is just one, balancing everything, but then balancing the book work with the actual going out and doing it. Then of course there's the imposter syndrome. So feeling like, wow, I'm expected to like do all this and I'm expected to to kind of just jump in and prescribe a patient, but I'm only a third year medical student. And of course we have doctors that like will you present to them and they'll ask you questions and kind of push your thinking along, but it still was nerve wracking to kind of have that jump and leap from responsibility. But I think medicine's a field where that keeps happening, where every next stage you get to, there's just a big jump that you don't feel like you're ready for, but you adapt and you expand to it.
Yeah, that is amazing. I'm glad you also touched on the imposter syndrome because I think that's something people are like now being more aware of, and especially with professionals. Like we're put into situations where we feel like we're still human. Like we're like, oh my goodness, this is am I ready for this? Like, am I the right person for this job?
Yeah,
Especially like as you mentioned, like you're a med student and you're interacting with an actual human patient, like
yeah.
a person
Mhm.
that has a real medical condition going on. So I'm really glad you got to have those experiences, but also at the same time, I can understand why it's super nerve wracking.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So now that you're in your fourth year of medical school, what do you do in your typical week?
Yeah, so I'm on a research year right now, so my typical week doesn't look like most students, but I'll kind of explain it and then explain what it looks like in medical school. So for my research year right now, as I mentioned, I'm at Hopkins. I'm doing orthopedic surgery research. I actually operate Monday through Wednesday. So Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, I'm in the operating room with the doctor that I work with. And then Thursdays and Fridays are usually clinic. And so that'll be a day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. where patients will come in with various concerns. They'll say maybe my shoulder hurts, or I can't lift my arm right now, or I have neck pain, or I have back pain. And we'll try and kind of parse through what's going on. We use different physical exams to really diagnose what's happening and to understand it. We have a lot of different diagnostic tools, so we can use things like X-rays or CT scans to better like visualize what's happening as well. And then we help them out and decide, do they need surgery, or is there other things that we can do? Can we send them to physical therapy? Can we send them to maybe just home? There's something really wrong with them. And so really understanding that. So that's what my year looks like right now. Then I do research as well, which is where we find some type of question, we create a hypothesis, and then we use the data that we have from patients that we've worked with to try and better understand that. So that's my year right now. I think for most for if you're, I'll explain third year too, because that's an interesting year. For third year medical students, you are kind of hopping between different rotations. So, for example, when I was in my third year, I started with internal medicine, which is just basically people that are in the hospital could come in with anything. It could be heart failure. It could be you're having a stroke, a heart attack. It could be that suddenly you're not seeing anything. Why is that? And so internal medicine is one option. Then you could do surgery. You could do pediatrics just in the clinic where you're seeing a lot of kids. You could do family medicine where you're kind of seeing everything and they come into your hospital. And then there's so many different specialties from dermatology to orthopedics to just honestly name it, it's there. And so during your third year, you're kind of going through and rotating in these different places and figuring out what is it that you want to do in the future. Then fourth year is a little bit more of the same, but you have more responsibility. So doctors will say, you are kind of the doctor now. Like you are only a year out before you work. And so if you're doing internal medicine, you're expected to have a full docket of patients, maybe 5 patients that you work with specifically, you see every single morning, you write notes on, and you talk to. And so it's just really interesting seeing kind of how the medical process exists. I think a lot of people just kind of go from 0 to 100. They either see someone as a doctor or not, but there's so many steps in between that lead us up and help us to become confident in our skills before we get there.
It's really cool. And also to have the experience, as you mentioned, to go through the different disciplines in medicine and just see like what they're working with.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I
I
think
love all these experiences for you.
really quickly, like this, I think the craziest story for me, or the craziest experience that I had for my rotation, was definitely labor and delivery. I mean, you hear so much about childbirth, but quite frankly, I feel like in the United States we don't do a good enough job of explaining just like anatomy, or just any of it. And so the first time I saw a C-section, I was shocked. 'Cause I was like, this is what a C-section is? Or even the first time that I saw a woman give birth, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is insane. But I think it's something that we should learn at an earlier age that students should have access to understand more about anatomy. I'm so happy I got that experience because it's really made me just appreciate medicine more.
Yes, that is very important, especially like I'm thinking about like TikTok, and we're going to get into TikTok soon.
Mhm.
But I've learned more about the stages of pregnancy and what women go through and all the different symptoms they have and conditions they can get while being pregnant. And TikTok has taught me a lot
Yep. Yeah.
about that I had never got in school. So that's something you brought up that's very. But speaking of TikTok, what made you decide to become the medical mythbuster, and where do you get the inspiration for your TikToks?
Yeah. Whew. The inspiration, I'm honestly not sure, but I'll kind of walk you through the story of how I started my TikTok. So, as I mentioned, during my first year of medical school, we went entirely online. And it gave me a lot of time to kind of think for myself and just be like, have extra time that wasn't being spent traveling to school or like going to the hospital to like see patients as much. And during that same time, there's just a lot happening in kind of the atmosphere, the political atmosphere. There was the George Floyd protests that were happening over the summer, and Breonna Taylor, hearing about her story, Ahmed Aubrey, all these people that were Black, young professionals that looked like me, that could have been me, that were unfortunately dying. And I think I thought a lot about how the medical system, in some ways, was complicit in that, especially when it came to in my medical school classes, I kept hearing that Black and Brown populations are more likely to die of COVID than anyone else. But they wouldn't really dive any deeper than that. They just leave it at that tagline, And I kept asking myself, well, why? Like, at my medical school, me and one other student were the first two Black students at my school, and so I was always thinking about like, okay, why? Like, they've probably never had a Black student before, and so though they haven't had a Black student before, and so what kind of how's your curriculum teaching that? Like when you say Black patients are more likely to die of COVID, what message does that send? It makes it seem as if it's biological as opposed to outside forces. Things like the history of redlining or being put into areas that have systemic discrimination, whether that's because of pollution or environmental racism or you name it, it happens. And so I was thinking a lot about these types of things as I was in my classes. And in December of 2020, I came across an article that was talking about pulse oximeters, which are these devices that go on your finger and they measure your blood oxygen saturation, how much oxygen you have that's bound to your blood cells. And the study showed that in Black patients, that pulse oximeter could overestimate your oxygen saturation, meaning that if you actually don't have much oxygen on your hemoglobin, that pulse oximeter would make it look like it's normal. And I was shocked because I was like, wait, this is pretty important because in the hospital, we use this pulse oximeter on all patients. And for COVID, if someone has a low oxygen saturation, that's how you kind of know, let's keep them in the hospital for a little bit longer. We need to give them more oxygen. We need to give them like a nasal cannula, etc. And so when I saw that study, I just finished my pulmonology unit and I was like, why did we never learn about this? Why is this the first time I'm hearing about it? And so I did what I feel like anyone else from my generation would do for something surprising they learned about. I went to TikTok and I made a 30-second video about it, and that video ended up blowing up. I think it got over 500,000 views in 24 hours. It was from mostly the comments were from doctors and nurses and PAs that were saying, "I've never heard about this. I had no idea that this device didn't work as well in darker skin tones." Even though I realized studies had been showing this for more than a decade. And so it's just information that wasn't being taught well in medical school or even in residency. So that was really the first time that I created a video where it was about racial disparities in medicine. And after that, I was like, okay, where else does this exist? What else is there in medicine that people aren't learning about right now? And unfortunately, the list is long, especially when it comes to things that relate to race. There was things like the GFR equation, which measures how well your kidneys function. And for decades, there'd been this racial correction that assumed that all Black patients had better kidney functioning. When you look at why that was, it was because they made an assumption that all Black people have higher muscle mass than any other race. The thing about this equation was it was only for Black people versus non-Black. And equations like that exist all throughout medicine, from kidney functioning to UTIs and who gets diagnosed with them, to cardiac functioning, how well your heart works, to spirometry, how well your lungs work. There's equations that assume that if you're Black or Asian, you have less lung volumes than other people, and that can be serious because it makes it harder to be diagnosed with things like asthma or COPD. And so all these things I was kind of learning not in my medical school, but on my own, doing my own research, googling it. And I just started posting more of it online because I realized there was no central place that was accessible to patients that it could be accessed from.
That's crazy. And I've seen some of your TikToks, and there's lots of things where I'm like, I can't believe that's a thing. But then you have to remember that racism is like permeates through everything, every aspect of this country. And the fact that like it has such a grip on medicine
Yeah,
and to be treated like a whole different class of people, and being diagnosed with different things just because of the color of our skin is just it's insane that it's
absolutely.
still even happening to this day.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it's been happening is because no one's actually looked at it deeply enough, or if they have, often this research is locked behind paywalls. And so, or it's not told by someone that's in the medical system that can actually decipher and translate what it means for the general person.
Yeah, that's yeah. But so moving on to next question, how has being the medical mythbuster changed your life? And do you have any memorable experiences from interacting with your followers that you would like to share?
Oh, it's been crazy in the best way possible. I think from the medical school standpoint, it makes me appreciate medicine so much more, and realizing that there's so much information that people don't know about and can ask about. I think in terms of like how has it changed my life, I now sit on a lot of different just organizations trying to help them think about how do we get healthcare information out there that's accessible. I've worked with the World Health Organization. I sit on a roundtable with the White House. I work with the Atlantic. I mean, I've worked with TikTok to talk to them about like how do you make sure you diversify content even in social media. So I've kind of expanded even beyond healthcare, just thinking generally, how do we make sure that we are putting accurate, equitable information out there and allowing people of all like races, and backgrounds, socioeconomic status, to be able to have access to this. That's one. And I definitely have some memorable experiences and stories that people have told me. So, one of my favorite ones, I created a video about this type of cancer called acral melanoma. It's a type of cancer that doesn't necessarily present like how other melanoma presents, which is on your skin here. You can kind of see it'll be round. Acral melanoma presents on your palms, on your nail beds, on the soles of the feet, in places that aren't really exposed to sun as much. I posted a video about it, how it predominantly impacts people that have African and Asian ancestry. And I had a woman reach out to me saying, "Hey, I saw your video. I've had this mole for a long time. Because of your video, I'm gonna go get it checked out." Well, I got a message like later on, and she let me know that it was precancerous. So because of my video, she ended up going to the hospital, getting it checked, getting it removed and biopsied. And so that was a moment where I was like, wow, like this is a way that social media can inspire people to take control of their own health. Another moment is about the pulse oximeter. So I mentioned how the pulse oximeter unfortunately doesn't read equally on darker skin and can cause people to go home earlier. I had someone reach out to me on LinkedIn and he said, "Hey, I saw your video. When I went to the hospital, I had COVID and they were about to send me home. But I told them, hey, I saw this guy's video. Don't know what it means for me, but I would like to stay in the hospital a little bit longer." That night, he ended up crashing and he wasn't able to breathe. He was just, it looked like he was almost about to die. Thankfully, the doctors were there and were able to save him. And he told me that he thinks if he hadn't seen my video, he wouldn't be here today. So those two stories are ones that I think about a lot because I realized just the power that education, medical education, in the hands of communities who are often overlooked can have.
Wow, that is amazing. That's I am so like that makes me even more grateful that you are one of people who are talking about these things and really getting people to know what's going on because it's something that whenever we have this ignorance of especially medicine, like
Mhm.
ignore like all the time, something goes wrong with like, oh, pain, I'll just deal with it. I'll just deal with it. And it can be very serious. So
Absolutely.
I'm very thankful that you make these videos and actually saving lives. That's crazy.
Thank you.
So now I want to jump into a lot of these adorable questions that we got previously from our audience that they submitted beforehand. So let's jump
Mhm.
into these.
Yeah.
So, an elementary student from Oklahoma asks, would leeches really help sick people in the olden days? And are antibiotics good for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yes, in the olden days, leeches were actually used for medical procedures. So it was believed that bad blood was the cause of a lot of diseases, and so leeches were used to remove that bad blood. And so it was called bloodletting, and it was used for a lot of different things, from fevers to headaches to even like things like mental illnesses. And so while it was used a lot then, we don't use it as much now because we have a lot of different more modern ways to treat things. But it actually is used in some cases. So it can be used to keep wounds open, for example. But a lot of different ways that it's actually still used, especially when there's not. If maybe you're in somewhere that doesn't have access to a lot of different modern medical equipment. And then are antibiotics good for you? Antibiotics are a type of medication, and they can fight bacterial infections. They don't work against viruses. That's why they're called antibiotics. So yes, they can actually be helpful for you. But what people don't know often is that if you take too many antibiotics, you can actually create bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotics. So it's important not to take too many antibiotics, and that's called antibiotic stewardship.
So, next question we have is a middle school student from Florida asks, can you revive someone from the dead? Can a kiss of true love actually heal people?
So unfortunately, no, we can't revive people from the dead right now. If the brain or other organs shut down, it's generally considered irreversible. But I will put a caveat. There are some cases where medical interventions like CPR, which is where you can give chest compressions and breaths, or defibrillation, which is an electric shock, can actually get someone's heart to restart and resuscitate a person. It's not quite bringing them back from the dead, but in a way, it kind of is like that. And can a kiss of true love actually heal people? Unfortunately, there's no evidence for that. So I have to say no, but it could increase your serotonin levels, which can make you happier.
Hey, we love increasing serotonin levels. So another student asked from elementary school, they asked from California, how much caffeine is too much caffeine? If you let your hair dry without a dryer, will you get a headache?
So the amount of caffeine that you drink that's considered too much really depends on the person. It depends on things like your age, how much you weigh, your overall health. But like in general, we what physicians will say is a moderate intake of caffeine is about 400 milligrams per day. So that's about 4 cups. So typically you don't want to go more than that because that can lead to anxiousness, you can have increased heart rate, you can have difficulty sleeping, and sleep's important, so make sure to get that. To your question of if you let your hair dry without a dryer, will you get a headache? There's no research showing that right now, actually. Headaches can be caused by a lot of different things: stress, dehydration, changes in weather. And so let's say maybe you have wet hair and it's cold outside, that might be possible. But your hair letting your hair dry without a dryer isn't shown to in research to contribute to headaches.
Another elementary student from Oklahoma asks, will milk help you grow?
Great question. You probably heard from your parents, drink your milk. And it is really good for you. Milk is nutrient rich. It has a lot of different vitamins and minerals that are important for your overall health, especially for helping you get strong bones and strong teeth. It also contains vitamin D, which is really helpful for our bodies to absorb calcium. Super important for that. It also can is a source of protein as well. So overall, milk, yes, it can help you grow. It's a healthy part of your life. But in addition to drinking milk, you also have to have a balanced diet. So make sure that you're eating those greens, even if you don't like them. And growth is really complex. So there's a lot of different factors from genetics to nutrition to physical activity that can impact it.
Okay. A middle school student from Massachusetts asks, can you break your fingers when cracking knuckles? Can playing video games cause people to become violent?
Those are great questions. So cracking fingers, breaking fingers, probably not. We actually don't quite know why we can crack fingers, and so that's something really interesting. Um, and then in terms of can playing video games make you more violent? There's been studies out there that are looking at this. Right now, the consensus is probably not. But you want to make sure that you limit your time that you're watching screens in general and playing video games. Make sure to get out there, get some exercise. Yeah, you want to make sure that you're being a well balanced student.
Exactly. An elementary student from New York asks, how do ligaments and muscles pull or rip? How do bones kind of regrow and become good again?
Ooh, you're gonna get me to go into all my all my the pathophysiology of it. So we have cells in our bodies, so things like chondrocytes and osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Osteoclasts break down bone, osteoblasts can build it back up. And so we have these little cells that are actually constantly helping to create bones and ligaments. You can tear them if you kind of stretch them beyond where they should go. So, for example, in our shoulders, we have this muscle, a group of muscles called the rotator cuff muscles. And so, if you either stretch too far or you just from overuse of them, you can tear them. And so, in order to kind of get them fixed, sometimes you have to actually get surgery for that. But the best way to avoid it is make sure that you stretch beforehand to really make sure that your muscles are kind of loose and ready to go. But yeah, I think making sure that if you're used to physical activity, make sure that you don't over exert yourself, and that's one of the best ways to avoid getting any fractures or even any tears in your muscles.
And an elementary student from North Carolina asks, do people of color need to wear sunscreen?
Yeah, I love this question because I made a video about this online and people were shocked. The answer is yes. Even if you have darker skin, you need to wear sunscreen because it's helpful. So in people with darker skin, the reason why skin is darker is because of a pigment called melanin. Melanin is protective against the sunlight and UV rays. But the thing to know is it's even though it's protective, it doesn't prevent all damage. Sunscreen can help with that damage that it doesn't prevent. So no matter who you are, wearing sunscreen can be really helpful for that as well. And studies show that people with darker skin are diagnosed with conditions like cancer that can be caused by the sun at later stages. And so really understanding that sunscreen can protect your skin from sun. The best numbers to wear is SPF of at least 30. So when you look at that bottle, it usually says what the SPF is. You can check there.
Excellent. And lastly, an elementary student from Florida asks, does drinking water actually help with headache?
Yes, drinking water actually does help with, or it can help with headaches, but it's just important overall for maintaining good health. So it has a lot of different benefits. It can help our bodily functions. It helps with digestion, absorption, transportation of nutrients, a lot of different things. So make sure you drink your water. It's really important to drink it because it can help overall all your functions.
Excellent. So now we are unfortunately at the end, but I have the final two questions I love asking, and they're very important before we finish off. So, what does Black/African American representation in STEM mean to you, especially in the field of medicine? And also, what advice do you have for members of our audience that want to follow a similar path as you?
Yeah. I always say that diversity in healthcare is important because we serve a diverse population. When we have future STEM leaders that have come from different backgrounds, we're able to get new ideas, we're able to contribute new things, and we're able to have a stronger healthcare field overall in the United States. For people that want to get into medicine as well, I say really find people that are role models for you. Do the research and get out there. Read books about trailblazers. On right now on my social media, I have a whole series of called Woke Black History, and I'm basically talking about people from history that a lot of people don't know about, but are so inspiring. So for people that want to follow the footsteps, get inspired, learn about the stories of other people, and just know that no matter what setbacks you have, if you want to get there, you can.
Well, Joel, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story with us and for giving us insight into the world of medicine and the disparities within it. To everyone watching, thank you for spending your time with the National Museum of African American History and Cultures Through the Window and Into the Mirror, a career conversation series. Thank you all for your participation, and please remember, history is made by doing ordinary tasks extraordinarily well over long periods of time. Before you sign off, please take time to complete an evaluation form for this interview session. The link to the evaluation form is posted in the chat. If you have time, please take 2 minutes and fill it out. Thank you very, very much. Stay safe and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye,
Thank you so much.
everyone.
Bye.